On Sunday, after news broke of the fall of Kabul, the Afghan capital, to Taliban, security experts around the world expressed grave concern over what this could mean for global security. Of particular concern is that the return to power of the Taliban 20 years after it was overthrown by an international coalition led by the US will serve as a morale booster to other extremist militias around the world. Nigeria, which has been engaged in a battle against Boko Haram and ISWAP insurgents in the northern parts of the country, is one of the many vulnerable countries that could witness a resurgence of terrorist attacks. Joining us now to discuss the Taliban's return to power, the humiliating exit of the US from Afghanistan, and what this portends for countries such as Nigeria, is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. Good morning, Professor Akinyemi, and welcome to the morning show, sir.
Good morning, Ms. Abiola.
Good morning, sir. Good to have you on the program. Well, the crisis in Afghanistan has been described as a failure of U.S. policy in that axis, and also as a clear indication of miscalculation on the part of both the Trump and the Biden administration. To what extent are these views true in your assessment?
Good morning, Dr. Abati. You'll recall January this year when Biden started making his appointments on the national security team. I expressed some concern as to the maturity and experience of his team. But of course, the response that we got was that they've been with him since his Senate days, and he himself had sufficient experience in foreign policy field. Now, since assumption of office, some policies have been made which have confirmed my own uneasiness about these policies. And one of these now is what has just happened in Afghanistan. Now, let's be clear about this. Biden and Trump are right to get America out of Afghanistan. I mean, if they haven't succeeded after 20 years, after over 2,000 American lives lost, over 400 British lives lost, then they should get out and leave the Afghanistans to solve out their own problems. But it is the way and the manner in which this has been done. Look at the flip-flop. You decide to pull out the 2,500 soldiers that Trump left there. You gave end of September as the deadline. You put them out first week of August. And now you've sent back in 6,000. As of last night, you sent in 5,000. By this morning, you've added another 1,000 troops. The British are also sending back troops, all in order to help evacuate the diplomatic and auxiliary staff, as well as the Afghans who had helped them. Why not do this while the original troops were still in there? If you saw the chaos on the runway of the international airport in Afghanistan, both yesterday night and this morning, For those of us who are old enough to remember South Vietnam, Saigon, is simply a replay of that. Why? There was, everybody knew or could predict what was going to happen. Dr. Abachi, let me tell you something. I also hold up my hand that I was wrong originally. I thought that Kabul will hold out until end of this year. But by 2 weeks ago, I was saying on my podcast that both the president and his vice will be in exile from Afghanistan by the end of this month. Well, both of them have taken flight. So, it is this unpreparedness of the American administration that I think has proved worrisome for all foreign policy experts. Before I answer the question that Ms. Abiola asked me, I want to say this, and I want to be clear about it. Even though George Bush, the son, was right to have hit back at Al-Qaeda for 9/11, he could have done it using American Air Force power. The B-52 bombers could have reduced those mountains and those caves in Afghanistan to pure rubbish. He could have wiped out the Al-Qaeda right there. Why did he need to put troops on the ground? Why did they need to put boots on the ground? For one good reason. George Bush, the son, did not fight in Vietnam. His father managed to save him fighting in Vietnam. So he now thought Afghanistan was an opportunity for him to show his manhood. And there was Tony Blair in England who joined him both in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Two young heads of state who had never fought a war in their lives, but were prepared to risk the lives of other people. And this is the consequence of it. So they were wrong in the way in which they went into Afghanistan, and they are now wrong in the way in which they have left, even though they are right to leave. As regards the question of Ms. Abiola on consequences for the rest of the world, the victory of the Taliban, of course you are right. All over the world now, jihadists will be happy not only at the victory of the Taliban, but they will be energized this morning as to the fact that if the Taliban could defeat the most powerful country in the world and send them running helter-skelter, they also could take on their own opponents, their own governments, and perhaps look towards Kabul as another center of encouragement for whatever it is that they decide to do. I think it's a sad day, not only for the Afghans, not only for the women and children who were looking forward towards 21st century, but for the whole world. Maybe when that scholar talked about a clash of civilizations. Maybe we should have paid more attention to him. At that time, the regular scholars shouted him down. They rubbished that is theory, that concept of the clash of civilizations. But now, is that not what we are seeing? Is that not what we are seeing? While Biden is pushing this concept of democracy, China, Russia, Iran, and now Afghanistan are all now positing opposite concepts. I think we are in for, well, an interesting time.
Well, a clash of civilizations is exactly what we're seeing. I also wanted to add to the lessons from Saigon that were not heeded, the lessons from that, misjudged war, from a misadventure in Iraq with George W. Bush and Tony Blair that they will never live down, quite frankly. There's also the criticized as hasty withdrawal of U.S. troops in 2011 by then-President Obama. And Joe Biden was his vice president, and the Republicans really made hay of that fiasco, saying that that caused the rise of ISIS. It's unfortunate that President Biden didn't himself learn those lessons. But I wanted to talk about the China factor. Since you just mentioned China, the Taliban is waxing so strong, scoring diplomatic coups like peace talks with President Donald Trump without the Afghan government in the room. There was even supposed to be a meeting in Camp David, which had to be cancelled almost at the last minute. The Taliban were also received warmly by the Chinese government. What is China's stake in this unfolding debacle?
Well, China shares a common border with Afghanistan. China now sees in what has happened in Afghanistan a one-up against the United States. You'll recall that China and America are having a terrible, rocky relationship since towards the tail end of Trump's administration, especially because of the hacking and, what they regard as stealing of American technology and what have you. And then since Biden came in, his emphasis on democracy as a primer for his foreign policy, their relationship has been very bad. And now, to sit and watch on television, documents being burnt in American embassy, that flag being brought down, a humiliation sign of defeat, and then what's happening, first of all, pulling out troops, sending back troops, all, I think it's a sign of inexperience and inability to handle a complex world. The Chinese are having the laugh of their life. The laughter of their life. But at the same time, it gives China another ally in this competition for who is going up and who is coming down in the development of a new world order. There is going to be a new world order. The actualization of it is not going to be this year or next year, but already you can see China moving up, Russia from having lost status coming back up, and the United States not knowing what it has to do with its own status. Please don't get me wrong. Militarily, the United States is still the most powerful country in the world. But economically and in terms of gravitas, the United States is losing status as the global power that we used to know. So I'm afraid this is a 1+ for China in building its own status and its own position, especially in that part of the world.
I mean, great insights and, great analogy about the war of the world. Probably, I mean, that reminds me of Thucydides a lot, that wrote about the Peloponnesian Wars and the clash of civilization and thought process and how that happened and how that got up to this time. Some will argue, number one, and this will be my first question, that it's another show of how nepios, let me use that word, the Americans are when it comes to, diplomacy and foreign affairs, because the same thing happened to them in Vietnam. They got into a war they shouldn't have got into, just like it happened to them in 2001 too. They got into Afghanistan where they should not have gotten into. I mean, some other options, they could have even used the same Taliban to give up one of their men, Osama bin Laden, because Al-Qaeda was embedded with them and Al-Qaeda had fought with the Taliban, rather than going all out and putting boots on the floor. But my second question will be, does America really need a Henry Kissinger now? And who can be that Kissinger to them? Because obviously it doesn't look like Anthony Blinken for me. Maybe he's happy playing his guitar somewhere, because he's also a recording artist, rather than diplomacy. But who can be that Kissinger for America? Because they need a think tank now, somebody that can think this through for them, because they are deep in the dirt. And it's, like the Americans would say, a double whammy for them.
Mr. Oseni, you are right that there is the need for a strategic thinker, somebody who could think outside the box. They haven't had any since Kissinger left office as Secretary of State. I don't know. There are scholars all over the world. I mean, all over the American world, Harvard, Yale, people writing. There is the chairman of the, Richard Haas is his name, chairman of the Foreign Relations Council in New York. I mean, when you listen to him talk, but, I mean, this is really, I can't come up with names that they are there. They are there. We are suffering not only in America, but all over the world. In Britain, even in Nigeria here, we are suffering from that lack of people with great intellect and great names. Before Nixon appointed Henry Kissinger, we knew about him. Not just those of us who studied in the United States. Scholars all over the world knew about him. Although, mark you, Henry Kissinger was a great European scholar, he wasn't an expert on other parts of the world. And don't forget that both Nixon and Kissinger, in fact, made terrible mistakes in Vietnam before they finally, got out. But the scholars are there. I'm sorry I can't give you names. They're there. But what has struck me, which you have drawn attention to, is the lack of, profound thinkers in the world, even as of now. When you read the New York Times or Le Monde, even in China, in the days of Zhou Enlai, Zhou Enlai was a profound world figure who the Chinese allowed to play that role. I can't find In China, a Chuen Lai. Just like in the United States, one cannot find a Henry Kissinger.
Well, Prof, quickly, what should the international community do next? Britain is trying to recall Parliament. The United Nations Security Council is also going to meet. The Americans are flying out of the airport in Kabul. What should the international community do next? Focus on humanitarian crisis that will emerge, or impose sanctions, or perhaps go and flush out the Taliban? And what lessons can we as Nigerians learn from this, from all of this? Because the president of Nigeria has an article in the Financial Times of London in which he has expressed an opinion about the situation in Afghanistan, and is asking for partnership of the United States and, expressing confidence about us being able to handle our situation.
Dr. Abati, there's nothing the world can do about what is happening in Afghanistan. We'll all go through the dancing and the movement of chairs around without anything. China will recognize them. Pakistan will recognize them. Russia will recognize them. All the countries that surround them will recognize them. Noises will be made calling on Taliban to recognize human rights, the rights of women, let children, especially female children, go to school and all that kind of thing. Hopefully, the Taliban themselves, will have learned a lesson not to be crude in the way in which they carry out their public policy. Let me quickly say something, because we've been talking about the Taliban as if it is one group. The Taliban isn't one group. The Taliban has different sections. Afghanistan is a tribal nation, and I don't mean that I don't mean to look down upon them. That is simply the truth. So the Taliban in one section behavior will be different from the Taliban in another section. We are just going to have to concentrate on the Taliban that holds power in Kabul. Al-Qaeda is going to be embedded there. ISIS is going to be embedded there. And so for the next 6 months, we just have to play it as it goes. In regards to our president's appeal to the world, there is no doubt that there must be, if we are going to have a stable world, there must be a concerted action about fighting terrorism. I would rather live under any other administration than live under Boko Haram or live under ISWA or live under ISIS. That is, we must accept that those are terrible organizations to entrust the lives and the future of human beings to. There is a need for global concerted action against terrorism, but it must not be used as a weapon of one group against another.
Well, Prof, on that note, we'll take just a quick break, and then when we return, the conversation will continue. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Director General of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs. Prof, you established, quite rightly, raised a great point before we went on the break, that the Taliban is not a monolith. So while some of their promises are quite risible, if you're into gallows humor, promising to assure women's education can continue is a bit of a joke, promising that Afghanistan will not turn into a terrorist hotbed is also a bit of a joke. Can we take them on their word that they have promised to start peace talks with other factions within Afghanistan, or is Afghanistan looking potentially at a civil war?
I wouldn't totally rubbish the promises made by the Taliban, because as I said towards the tail end of my intervention, there are several sections of the Taliban. There are several Talibans, in fact. It's not one organization as we conceptualize organizations. And so you are going to have different policies being implemented, or different variations of the same policy being implemented all over Afghanistan. There are modern sectors of the Taliban who probably feel that they have something to gain with, if you like, throwing crumbs to the rest of the world by allowing girls, in Kabul and those provinces that are near Kabul to go to school, keeping some of the women in the diplomatic corps and in the in the civil service. I think there will be attempts at doing that. Number two, countries like China and Russia probably are going to have some influence on the Taliban in terms of wishing to prevent their isolation. And this is where the offer of recognition by important countries to the Taliban could in fact be attempts at keeping them within the world rather than letting them behave like as if they don't belong to this world the way they did in the 1990s. I don't think there will be a civil war in Afghanistan. Civil war with whom? The army that the Americans built has disintegrated completely. It was the presence of the United States that served as a cement for that army, that civil service, that military establishment. The U.S. presence was the cement that held everything together. Now that the United States has left, things are simply falling apart. Unless, and I hope it doesn't, unless the United States now decides to use the CIA and its deep state to start fomenting trouble within Afghanistan.
Okay.
You know, there is a video that I stumbled across only 2 days ago of Mrs. Clinton boasting, obviously it was done a long time ago, that we created the Taliban because we wanted to use the Taliban to fight the Russians or the Soviet Union as it was then. We armed them, we trained them, and now it's the same Taliban that then turned against the Americans. So we should them the Americans need to go back to the drawing table.
Yes,
The same thing with the Chinese. Everybody as to how to handle this new Taliban in Afghanistan?
Okay, sir. Quickly, just a one-word answer. Technically, is the Soviet Union winning the Cold War? A one-word answer.
Is the Soviet Union winning the Cold War?
Yes, because the tables have turned in the Cold War. The Soviets play the cards now as regards Afghanistan. They have played that cards with Crimea. Belarus is under them. They've deepened their force all over the world. China is communist, states and lies to be state capitalists. And the idea of communism still pervades the world today. So is the Soviet Union winning the Cold War? Because it's not ended.
No, I wouldn't, as a scholar, use the term Cold War. I would just say we are building a new world order.
Okay, sir.
Elements of it are already showing up, but it hasn't concretized yet.
Well, thank you very much.
I feel more comfortable using that concept.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, for joining us on the morning show and for your insights. Thank you very much indeed.